Hello, I'm Pastor Don. Welcome to Outback Adventures. Today I'd like to take you on a journey where my wife and I left home in October and we didn't get back until the following January. So it's a trip of almost 2.5 months. Are you ready to come with us? Well, we headed down the road from where we were living in Geraldton, and there we saw this beautiful rainbow. And we thought that's a promise of God's blessing on us for this trip. And maybe also it was a reminder that we were going to strike quite a bit of rain on this trip. But anyway, we headed down to Capel, south of Perth, and there we saw some people who had worked at Karralundi, which is the Adventist Church's Indigenous school up in the desert of Western Australia. In fact, it was Barbara's father who had started Karralundi Mission way back in about 1954. Well, there's some of Linton, her husband's cows, and then we headed to Manjimup. And on the way we saw this beautiful big flower pot. Well, it's really wisteria growing over an old shed, but it's quite something, isn't it? And down there in Manjimup, we caught up with some of our friends, Les Ryan and Pastor Tim O'Keefe and Jill Walker took me around visiting some of their friends. And then we headed further south, and the southwest corner of Western Australia has some massive big trees. Some of these kauri trees are 90 metres high, some 300 feet high. Look at that. That's the butt of one of these great trees. And there my wife standing beside one of these logs, and the beautiful wildflower, the clematis, growing nearby there. It's lovely, isn't it? Well, we headed further south to a place called Denmark. And there we visited with one of our pastors, Pastor Mark Goldsmith, and he said to me, I am studying with some Aboriginal people, an Aboriginal family, Ruby Riley and her girls, and he said, would you come with me? And so I had the privilege of going and meeting Ruby, and not long after that she was baptized, and a number of her daughters, and then she attended Mamarapha College, the Adventist Church's Indigenous Bible College. And it's just lovely to see people like this growing in Jesus. Well, from Denmark, we headed up north towards Kalgoorlie. Along the way, we saw another one of God's pot plants on the side of the road, the beautiful yellow flowers. We went through a town called Hayden, and there we saw a bony old horse, and then up to Kalgoorlie. Kalgoorlie is famous for being a gold mining town. Tons of gold have been dug out of this place over the years. And there at Kalgoorlie, we caught up with Edna Seegi and John Ulrich and Edie and so on, some of the family there. And then up to Leonora. And at Leonora, Jeannie Bingham and Tanya Bingham and some of her family, and some of the Seegis there, Dennis Seegi and Janelle Pierce and their lovely children. And it's always lovely to go into a community and to catch up with old friends and to have a prayer with them and to encourage them in their walk with Jesus. Well, from there we headed off towards Warburton, out in the desert. Warburton is in fact 1,500 kilometres from Perth, and so it's a long way out into the desert. And there I met some young men, some of the Wards and Jones families who have been to Karralundi over the years. And we have an Adventist school teacher there, Linton Graffin. And Linton took us for a walk around the community, and we caught up with Clara Bell Ward and her little one. Last time I saw her, she was just, I think, almost a schoolgirl, but now she has her own little one. Well, at Warburton, we met Pastor Livingston West. He is a local pastor there, and he's has lots of Adventist friends, and he is very supportive of us, and it was really good to meet him. We headed a little further out into the desert, and there we saw God's garden. Isn't it beautiful? After the rain, and there'd been lots of rain, And so there the desert truly blossomed like the rose, as the Bible says. And there are these lovely flowers, and if it wasn't the mauve-coloured flower, then you've got the yellow-coloured flowers. And it wasn't long on our trip before we started seeing puddles on the road. There'd been rain out in this country. There at Jamison community, we caught up with the Lane family. Barbara Lane had been at Carolundy in earlier years. And then we headed through Blackstone and then on to Wingalina. Quite picturesque country out here in this area. It's some beautiful hills and so on. Well, there we got to Wingalina, and there was Elaine Jones, another Carolundy student, and we always have a lovely visit there with Elaine. Well, we got through to the South Australia, to Pipiljara community, and Pipiljara's right on the corner post of Western Australia, Northern Territory and South Australia. And it is wonderful to go into these communities and there see the cross. These people love Jesus, and they love to hear about Jesus. And typical of the people there are Herbert Nelson and Melissa, and there are a number of young couples, just like Herbert and Melissa, who really love Jesus. And it's so good to see young people standing up for the Lord Jesus. Well, Herbert and Melissa, they have that's a proper dingo. They've brought it up as a pet, but it's a wild dingo. Well, there's some of the little young'uns there. I had to dress one of them up a bit, but anyway, that's all right. And there you see some of the folk that came along to our meetings, a meeting there, and we again preached the story of the second coming of Jesus, how He's coming back for the people of the desert as well as for other peoples. On this particular trip, Herbert took me out to visit Cameron Cooper, and another young man, and I met his wife too, young men who love Jesus and who are strong Christians. On the way back, we saw this big snake on the road, and they can be quite deadly, these fellas. You don't tangle with them. Well, that night we were going to have another outdoor meeting, but we weren't able to. In fact, we were all set up to have the meeting. I had my data projector all set up, and then the rain began to come down. So we had to quick pack it all up, and they found a room where we could have our program. And after the program, they wanted to know, do you have DVD, Christian DVD, music one, Bible story one? And so my wife had a supply of these things, and so she brought them out and there displayed them so that people could purchase what they wanted. The next morning I met Kenneth Ken, the chairperson of the community, and as soon as I went to shake his hand, he said, "I know you," he said. "I watching you on Hope Channel the other day." He said, "You showing us some of our friends," he said, "and it's real good to see them." And so it was lovely and again, a strong Christian man. This man has been one of the local preachers, and so it's good to meet them. Well, talking about satellite dishes, this is Bob Harders. And Bob Harders lives down south of Perth, but he has a ministry. And his ministry is going around putting up satellite dishes. And this little sign on his car, Christian TV and radio, is it's phenomenal, the response that gets. He has driven into a community and people have seen that and they've said, "Christian television, that's what we want. And we're sick of this normal TV. We want Christian stuff." And in some communities, he's been able to put a satellite dish up in almost every house in the community. There are many people out in the desert who I believe will be in the kingdom of God because of what Bob is doing with his satellite ministry. We're going to take a little break now, and when we come back, we're going to continue through the Anangu Pidginjarra lands of northern South Australia. Welcome back to Outback Adventures. I'm taking you through the northern part of South Australia. This is not desert country, it's beautiful, picturesque country. And on this journey that my wife and I were doing, we came to Canby community. And there we caught up with Louise Tunkin, and I showed her one of the paintings of the second coming of Jesus. And Louise really liked that. And she said, "But I got no money." But anyway, it wasn't long before she found $5 and she'd bought the poster. And I don't know what Louise did, whether she did a hand signal or whether she sang out, but others started coming, wanting to buy the poster of the second coming and the poster of the crucifixion. Well, we travelled on from Canby, and there more puddles on the road, and even the ducks were there on the puddles on the road, which was interesting. We got to Armata community, and there was Stanley Windy and Veronica Lewis. And as soon as I arrived, Stanley said, "I'd like to do Bible study," he said. "I'd like to go to Bible college, to Mamaruffa." And so we filled out an application form to try to make it possible for him to go. And then I showed him the poster of the second coming of Jesus. "Oh," he said, "beautiful." I showed him the crucifixion one. He said, "I must have that." And so there he came with his $10 for the two posters. And I don't know what he did, but for the next hour or so, people were coming until we'd sold out of second coming pictures. It was really quite an experience. There's Mona Matiki and some of her family there holding up what they had picked up. Well, we continued on through the lands, and it was just at its best because there'd been lots of rain over the last 12 months, and the desert was really something. There, the further east we came, the more water on the road we came to. And then we saw the grader driver. Now, whenever we see the grader driver, we pull up because we want to see whether it's our friend Roger Hunt from Oodnadatta. And sure enough, it was Roger. And before long, Roger was saying, "You know," he said, that Doug Batchelor's DVD on how the world will end, he said, "that's really been a blessing to me." And so we said, "Did you know that Doug Batchelor has a whole series of DVDs going through the major teachings of the Bible?" "Oh," he said, "I'd like those." And so now Roger has those DVDs to watch. We went on to Ernabella community, and there Margaret Dagg and Dudley Dagg had invited us to come and stay in one of their houses. And so that was a real blessing. And there, you know what that flower is? That's pomegranate flower. They have a pomegranate tree in their yard. And there down the back they have this mulberry bush, it was delightful to get some of this lovely fruit. And there at Ernabella, we saw our old friend Dale Richards. He was one of the Carolundy students from earlier years, and there he is with little baby Edward. And then the Adamson family, Tony Adamson and his family, and as soon as they saw the posters, "Oh," he said, "I must have one of these." And people just want to have these posters of Jesus and the second coming so that they can put them up on their wall and be reminded of these wonderful truths. It was really beautiful because of all the rain. There's the donkeys not looking like they're in a desert, but looking like they're in some park. But there the road, as we continued on, was a real mess from all of the heavy rain. We got down to Freegon, and there's Deborah Watson and some of her families, and Robert Stevens and Fiona Stevens there with little Keenan. And by the way, there's Keenan in the mobile swimming pool. They just got one of the big rubbish tins and fill him up with water, and it makes a great swimming pool. Well, again, we saw God's garden. It was just an amazing trip through the desert to see all of the flowers and everything looking so good. And we got down to Minterby, an opal mining town, and we had Sabbath there in the home of some of our Adventist folk. They have about 8 or 10 people that meet there of a Sabbath. And so it was good to fellowship with them. the Hanstras there at Minterby, they have a pet Alsatian dog and a pet magpie. And so the magpie says to the dog, "Sit, lie down," and the dog behaves himself and does what he is told. Well, that's sort of the story. There you can see the Malu Guru, the Sturt desert pea. They were flowering in different places. It was a delightful trip through the desert. We headed into the Fink, water on the road. We had meetings there with our friends at the Fink and caught up there with different ones. Raylene Ferguson there and her family. My old friend Howard Dool, and he's a delightful man and just loves to hear about Jesus and the Bible, loves to come along to the meetings. And there's my wife interviewing Violet Doolan's dog. Well, it looks like that anyway, but there's dear old Violet, one of the elders of the community, a dedicated, faithful Christian lady, and one that's also been to Mamaruffa College. And there's her husband, Yundu Spider. And dear old Violet and Yundu have said to me, when the Adventist church is built in the Fink, we want to be baptised there in that church. And that's wonderful. And we're making progress towards building the church there in the Fink. Well, Violet's grandson, Barry, has had a lot of problems. And he's been through some hard times. But on this visit, he came out with this picture that he had drawn on the back of a tea packet. And there it's a picture of Jesus dying on the cross, Jesus with a crown of thorns on his head. And Barry's written over here, "He did it for you, and he did it for you and me." And that's so true, isn't it? And it's really wonderful that Barry has come to that understanding that Jesus did it for him. Well, there we are heading now a little south of the Fink. And there's big Parenti on the side of the road. And this was the road, looking more like a river. And every tree that we pulled up under it was like a budgerigar aviary, because the budgies were all twitting and singing and chirping, making their nests and so on. And there you see the red-tailed black cockatoo. We're going to take a little break now, and then we're going to cross over the border into South Australia as we continue our 2-month-long journey. Welcome back. I'm taking you in this program on a trip that my wife and I commenced in October and we completed in January. And we're just going to cross from the Northern Territory into the South Australian state. There's the border. No customs, no checkpoints. You just open the gate and away you go through. This is way out back South Australia and Northern Territory. Well, the further we got, the muddier it got. And we were fortunate to be able to get through this section. But then when we got through that, and you see the water on the road ahead, you just wonder how far you are going to go. We got to Mount Dare Station, and there we're able to camp there. And these are very interesting bird nests. I think they're swallows' nests, but isn't it marvellous how they make these things and can stick all this mud together? Well, you can see that had a lot of rain out in the desert this season, because even the roads were starting to grow grass. Again, we came across the Sturt desert pea, and then across near Hamilton Station there, across the creek, and we got to Oodnadatta. And at Oodnadatta we met up with the Royal Flying Doctor pilot, who's an Adventist, and he had flown up there to Oodnadatta for the day, and when he's there for a few hours, he goes around visiting the people and praying with them and encouraging them in their walk with Jesus. And so he'd come to see Clary Warren and Audrey Stewart. And that day I went to visit with Audrey, and she's preparing for baptism, but she wants to thoroughly go through a series of Bible studies so she clearly understands what she's making a commitment to. And that's the right way to do it, by the way. It's very good. Well, that evening we had a meeting there in Ross Finn's yard, and we hung the sheet up to Keith Manunga's four-wheel drive, and there sang songs and told the stories of Jesus. And there you can see the fire in their yard where they'd been cooking their tea. Well, from there we headed down to Coopapedy, and the Moon Plain, usually just brown and dry, this time was all green. These are the breakaways just out of Coopapedy. And there at Coopapedy we had Sabbath with Pastor Allen, and they're actually worshipping under the ground in a dugout. It's quite amazing, isn't it? Well, from there we continued on down towards William Creek, past the dog fence, and then continued on. And again we could see the beautiful wildflowers. God's garden is certainly delightful. The lovely lake there with the sand dunes, and we went across the bottom of Lake Eyre. By the way, Lake Eyre is the lowest spot in Australia. It's about 50 feet or about 15 metres below sea level. And by the way, Lake Eyre is the largest lake in Australia, and it's the 18th biggest lake in the world. But mostly it's just salt, it's dry. But after heavy rains further north, it does fill up with fresh water and attract a lot of bird life there for a period of time. Well, heading further south, we saw the artwork of a sculptor from Melbourne. Rather unique things that he designs. Look at that hover bus. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be, but he certainly has a creative mind. And there at Maree in the northern Flinders Ranges, we had a meeting there in the home of Colleen Roberts, and there some of her family with her. And it's amazing to see, and it's wonderful to see how these folk are meeting now Sabbath by Sabbath and worshipping God. We continued on our journey. We saw the emus alongside the road, and then we headed to Port Augusta and had Sabbath there. And there's some of the men at church and the ladies and the young girls that were just high school girls when we lived in Port Augusta, but now they have their own babies. We arrived at Port Augusta in time to take Daryl Buzzacott to the plane to fly across to Mamaruffa College. And so while we were there, Nathan Tasker, the Royal Flying Doctor pilot, gave us a little tour through the plane there. We visited dear old Alma and Lola, and they were so happy to get the posters of the coming of Jesus too. And while we were there visiting, we were enjoying these little honey eaters in their beautifully made little nest, but they looked like they were ready to move out of home. From there we went down to Whyalla and caught up with some of our friends down there, some of the Winfields there, and then on to Murray Bridge in South Australia. And Winston Dance has been visiting some of the Aboriginal people there and encouraging them, and so he took me there to visit Sid and his wife. Well, it was a flight then across to Western Australia to Perth for Mamaruffa graduation, and then back to Victoria, and then up to New South Wales because we had a wedding to perform. But look at that beautiful big kangaroo and that lovely big goanna there. They're really something, aren't they? On the way, we passed through Canberra and visited with Evelyn Bean. Evelyn lives in a retirement village, but she has been encouraging others to make beanies and scarves for the people out in the desert, and we really appreciate what Evelyn and her friends have been doing. We headed further north and everywhere was beautiful because of all the rain. But we were heading to Stewart's Point in North New South Wales to perform the wedding for Matthew Gale and for Ruth Wiles. And it really looks lovely, and it's lovely to see young people. Both of these are Mama Ruffa graduates, and there my wife made the cake, and there they are. It was a happy celebration. And from there we came down to the ATSIM camp at Avondale, and from there we headed back across home to the west. This is my old roommate from college days, Greg Nolan. And there at Ceduna I had a most interesting experience. I was in the Foodlands car park, and I was doing some phone calls. My wife had gone to buy some food, and there I noticed these Aboriginal folk looking at me, and I thought, I don't think I know these people. And after I finished on the phone, this lady said to me, "Are you from the Christian Channel?" I said, "Yes." "Oh," she said, "we watch you on Hope Channel," she said. And they were so happy. She said, "We recognised you by your hat." And anyway, we had a lovely little chat. They called the family together. We had a prayer there together in the car park. And do you know what the latest is? This lady has now asked for an application to go to Bible college. Dear friends, people all over Australia, in some of the remotest areas, are enjoying the Christian Channel. They're watching Hope Channel, and they're gaining a blessing from it. And I would encourage you to get it so that you also can watch and be part of this.